In our previous video, we introduced you to the core CSS components in Bootstrap. In this video, we want to introduce you to the grid system. A grid is a system used in web design to help you to define the structure and layout of your pages in a consistent manner, by placing your content into a predefined set of rows and columns. This is not a new idea. Every time you pick up a magazine or a newspaper, you'll see a grid system at work. And on the web, the same concept has been adopted for creating engaging and interesting page layouts. Like newspapers, most content-based websites that you'll visit are using a grid system behind the scenes. So why should you use a grid in your development practice? Well, there are a number of benefits. Firstly, consistency and structure. It makes it much easier for you to create structured designs and layouts in your page. Furthermore, this adds consistency to your web page, which improves the user experience, because your users will find it easier to process the information visually. The second benefit is speed. Using a grid system drastically speeds up the time it takes to create and maintain your web pages. For example, you don't have to write and rewrite a large number of class names to manually handle the layout. The third benefit is responsiveness. Most grid systems allow you to create different layouts for different devices, so you can create rich, cross-platform and cross-device experiences. There are some disadvantages too. One of these is restrictiveness. If you have an ambitious design, your grid system might not support it natively, which means that you'll either have to try and customize the grid system or work outside of it entirely. This can become a huge time sink if you end up having to fight against a grid system just to get the layout you want. The second disadvantage is the fact that it's an external dependency, and like we've mentioned before, including any external dependency always increases the load time overhead of your web page. So how do grid systems work? Well, really by breaking up your pages into a set of rows and columns. The rows are stacked up on top of each other and flow down the page like we can see here. Within each of these rows, there are a number of columns that flow across the page and contain our content. These can be defined in a flexible manner, which allows you a huge number of different complex layouts. Bootstrap has its own grid system built in, and it's one of its most powerful features. In fact, the example grid you're looking at right now is built entirely with Bootstrap, so we can use it to illustrate the main features and how it works. So let's open our Chrome Developer Tools and take a look. In practice, a grid is just a combination of div elements paired with a number of class names. To define an area of your page as a grid, you first have to define a div element with the container class. Bear in mind you can have more than one of these containers on your page if you need multiple grid instances. By default, you'll notice our container is centered in the page with a max width of around 1140 pixels. This is useful for a centered grid of content, but sometimes we might want our grid to stretch all the way out to the edge of our page. This is known as a fluid layout, and we can implement that very easily by just replacing the container class with a container fluid class, as we've done here. Within our container, then, we can define a number of rows by creating div elements with the class name of row, and then we put the columns inside that. I'm just going to delete some of these elements from the example grid just to make it a little bit easier to visualize. So within each of these rows, we can define our columns, and our columns are the actual elements that surrounds and contains our content. In each row, we have a total of 12 units to play with, and how we break this space up in our columns is up to us, and depends on the layout that we're trying to achieve based on our wireframe. In each case, we simply have col, and then x, where x is the number of units we want this particular column to occupy within the row. Our first one then is col-12, which gives us a full width column. Our second one's a col-6, which gives us 2 half-width columns. We can also supply a screen size to these classes, but we'll look at that in the next video. There's nothing to say that instead of 12 units, we couldn't have 4, 8, 16, or 100. It's just that the Bootstrap developers decided that 12 is a good number to play with. And it is, because as we can see here in our example layout, we can divide it by 2 to get 2 6-unit halves. We can have 4 3-unit quarters, or 3 4-unit thirds. So this 12-unit approach is very convenient, as these thirds, quarters, and halves can be mixed up to make the majority of use cases for standard web layouts. When we look down the page, we can see some unusual layouts, like our 6-centered column here. Let's have a look at how that's done, and we can see that an offset class has been provided to offset this column by 3 and move it out from the left and into the center. We also have a wrapped row where the total number of units on a single row is greater than 12, so Bootstrap has wrapped it and pushed one of those columns on the next line. And finally, we have this 3-unit column followed by a 9-unit column. But when we look in the code, we can see that the 9-unit column actually comes first, but on the page it's been rendered afterwards. This is achieved by using the order class. So these are just some of the features of the Bootstrap grid that you can use to create rich, dynamic layouts. Have a look through the documentation to learn a little bit more. We haven't actually created our own grid just yet. We're going to do that in the next series of videos. In the next video, though, we're going to have a look at how responsive design is implemented with Bootstrap and learn how we can implement that in our Whiskey Drop application.